A war between the alliance of Greek city-states, the most significant being Athens and Sparta, and the Persian Empire. We know about these wars only from Greek sources. To a large extent, this was a war of Greeks against Greeks, as the most combat-ready part of the Persian army and navy consisted of units provided by Greek settlements in Asia Minor, which was part of the Persian Empire. The prelude to the war was the revolt in 500 BC of the Greeks of Miletus against Persian rule. Athens and Eritrea, from mainland Greece, sent 25 ships to aid Miletus, which allowed the Persian king, Darius I, to declare war on the mainland Greeks after the Miletus revolt was suppressed in 496 BC. Active hostilities began only in 490 BC. Before that, the Persian campaign led by Darius' son-in-law, the Greek Mardonius, to the Balkans in 492 BC was thwarted due to the destruction of the fleet. The new expedition initially developed quite successfully. Eritrea, located on the island of Euboea, was captured after a brief siege, and its inhabitants were deported to Persia. However, things did not go as planned with Athens. We know about the Greco-Persian Wars from Herodotus' history and other Greek sources. They claim that Darius' army numbered 1 million people. Allegedly, 100,000 of them landed on the Attica Peninsula near the village of Marathon, located 42 kilometers and 195 meters from Athens. This distance became the marathon distance in athletics. According to Herodotus, the Athenian army consisted of 10,000 hoplite infantrymen and was led by 10 strategists, the eldest of whom was Miltiades. Another 1,000 hoplites were provided by Plataea, an ally of Athens. The Greek historian Pausanias claimed that the Persian army at Marathon numbered 300,000 men, while the Athenians and their allies were fewer than 10,000. Most likely, Miltiades had slightly fewer than 5,000 heavily armed hoplite infantrymen and roughly the same number of lightly armed warriors. The main forces of Darius were to come to the aid of the rebels. When the Persian commander Darius realized that the Athenian army had arrived at Marathon, he considered his task accomplished. The Persians began to board the ships. The commander of the Athenian detachment, Miltiades, attacked the Persian rearguard covering the retreat and defeated it. The Persian cavalry, the main force of Darius, had already been loaded onto the ships and did not participate in the battle. On the Persian side, only foot archers and most likely a small phalanx of Greek hoplites fought. The phalanx led by Miltiades, when about 150 to 200 paces remained to the enemy, the range of an arrow shot from a bow broke into a run. Thus, they did not give the enemy archers time for effective shooting. Moreover, the rapid run increased the force of the attack. The Persian troops could not withstand the onslaught and were forced to retreat to the harbor. The Athenian army had to take a break, as the fighters were tired from the rapid run and the phalanx had broken its formation during the battle. With the help of the phalanx, it was easy to win the battle, but difficult to realize the fruits of victory. The Persian archers scattered and managed to quickly reach the ships. When, after a few hours, the Athenians resumed the pursuit, the Persians had already managed to board the ships but were forced to abandon part of their property in the camp, which fell to the victors. However, the Greeks failed to capture either prisoners or horses. The main losses they suffered in the skirmish with the Persian rearguard already on the shore. Here, the Athenian strategist Callimachus, who most likely actually commanded the Greek army in the Battle of Marathon, fell, and only the later historical tradition attributed the leading role to the surviving Miltiades. Herodotus claims that the Athenians lost 195 men killed and the Persians 6,400. In reality, the Persian losses are unlikely to have significantly exceeded those of the Athenians. The fact is that on the battlefield, the Athenians buried not only their own but also the Persians. The hill with the burial of the Greeks was later excavated by archaeologists. If several thousand Persians had died, as Herodotus said, their burial would have represented an even more impressive elevation. But nothing of the kind was ever discovered on the Marathon field. According to Herodotus, the Athenians managed to capture 7 enemy ships. A more plausible assumption is that a rising storm scattered the Persian fleet, and several ships were washed ashore and fell into the hands of Miltiades' warriors. The mention of the storm can be seen in Pausanias' report that the barbarians who landed at Marathon were met by the wrath of the goddess of fate Nemesis, daughter of Oceanus. Immediately after the victory, a messenger was sent to Athens. He ran the entire distance without stopping, managed to shout in the marketplace of Athens that the Persians were defeated and had retreated and collapsed dead. After this, the opposition did not dare to stage a rebellion. The Greek troops, having made a forced march, quickly returned home. The bad weather prevented the Persian fleet from arriving in Athens on time. Darius sailed to the shores of Asia Minor. Subsequently, the death of Darius and the revolt in Egypt, which lasted from 486 to 484 BC, forced the Persians to postpone a new campaign in Greece. The new king, Xerxes, only in 480 BC, having strengthened his position within the country, set out on a campaign to the Balkans. Herodotus comically precisely calculates his army at 4,200,000 people, including supply trains. Delbruck proved the absurdity of this number with a simple example. The Prussian army corps at the end of the 19th century, according to the charter, with a strength of 30,000 people on the march, stretched for about 21 kilometers, not counting the wagon park. Therefore, if we believe Herodotus, the marching column of Xerxes' army should have stretched for about 3,000 kilometers, even without supply trains. Consequently, at the moment when the Persian vanguard was landing in Greece, the rearguard should still have been in the Persian capital of Susa, beyond the Tigris River. In reality, both the Greek and Persian armies hardly exceeded several tens of thousands in number. The Persians crossed into the Balkans over a large bridge built across the Hellespont. The actions of the land army were supported by a large fleet. The Greek fleet failed to prevent the landing. The Greek army, consisting of a detachment of 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas, as well as detachments of the Bands and Thespians, covered the Thermopylae pass between northern and central Greece. The Persians managed to bypass the defenders of Thermopylae. Then Leonidas threw 4,500 of the 7,000 hoplites he had against them. But almost this entire detachment was destroyed by the 10,000-strong corps of the immortal the personal guard of the Persian king. The remaining the bands with Leonidas surrendered to the mercy of the victors. Only the Spartan king with a detachment of 300 of his bodyguards fought to the end. They all fell in battle. Meanwhile, the mainland forces of the Greeks retreated to the Isthmus of Corinth, which separated the Peloponnese from the rest of Greece. Here, the main part of the Spartan army came to the aid of the Athenians. Xerxes' troops occupied Attica, including Athens. The Greek fleet suffered a defeat at Cape Artemisium but remained combat-ready and retreated to the island of Salamis. Almost the entire population of Athens was also evacuated there, so the Persians got an empty city. The fate of the Greco-Persian Wars was decided in the naval battle of Salamis. The Athenian fleet was commanded by the strategist Themistocles, who was also its creator. He understood that only at sea could the Persian Empire be defeated. On land, the Persians would always have a numerical and qualitative superiority over the Greeks, especially since such Greek states as Thessaly and Boeotia had already sided with Xerxes. However, the larger the army of the Persian king, the more dependent it would be on sea supply. To lure the enemy into the narrow strait separating Salamis from the mainland, where the Persians could not use their numerical superiority, Themistocles resorted to a trick. He wrote a letter to Xerxes, claiming that the Greek fleet was ready to capitulate. The Persian king believed it, as he knew that there were sharp disagreements in the Greek camp. The Spartans proposed sailing to the Peloponnese, otherwise threatening to take their ships away. Against Xerxes' decision to go to Salamis, only the queen of Halicarnassus in Asia Minor, Artemisia, spoke out among the Persian leaders. She proposed moving to the Peloponnese with the land army, forcing the Spartan ships to leave Salamis. However, the majority of the commanders decided to attack the Greek fleet. When Xerxes' fleet entered the strait, it was attacked by Greek triremes, more powerful ships than the Phoenician galleys that formed the basis of the Persian fleet. A sketch of the Battle of Salamis has been preserved in Aeschylus' drama The Persians. At first, the Persian army stood firm, but when the ships crowded in the strait, they could not help each other and struck their own with bronze prows. All of them perished then, and the Hellenes skillfully struck them around. And the ships sank. And under the wreckage of the broken ships, under the blood of the dead, the sea surface was hidden. The shores were covered with the corpses of the slain, and the barbarian army in disorderly flight all hurried to sail away. The numerical superiority of the Persian fleet played against it here. The crowded ships in the conditions of the rising sea agitation caused more damage from collisions with each other than from the enemy. In this battle, the Greeks fought against the Greeks and Phoenicians, and the tactics were the same. They rammed the enemy's ships or moored to them, and the hoplites on the ships engaged in boarding hand-to-hand combat. The Persian fleet lost the Battle of Salamis due to Xerxes' overconfidence, who believed that the enemy was ready to capitulate and considered the naval expedition to Salamis as a simple demonstration of force. The Greeks lost 40 ships out of 350 in the battle, and the Persians lost half of their 500 ships participating in the battle. After the defeat of the fleet, Xerxes left Greece with most of his army. The stay of the main mass of Persian troops in the Balkans lost its meaning. After the death of a significant number of ships, they could not be supplied. Only the corps under the command of Mardonius remained here. He led the Persian troops out of Attica and settled in Thessaly, allied with the Persians. After the victory at Salamis, Themistocles proposed sending the fleet to the Hellespont and destroying the bridge, thereby depriving the Persian army in the Balkans of the last supply route. However, the point of view of other strategists prevailed, believing that it was first necessary to liberate Greece from the Persians. In the spring of 479 BC, Mardonius received reinforcements and again occupied Athens. However, in the same year, off the coast of Asia Minor at Cape Mycale, the Greek fleet under the command of the Spartan king Leotychides and the Athenian Xanthippus, thanks to the betrayal of the Ionian Greek sailors serving the Persians, burned the remains of the Persian fleet. Deprived of supplies, Mardonius was forced to leave Athens and accept a battle near the city of Plataea in Boeotia with the united Greek army led by the Spartan king Pausanias. In this battle, the Athenians had 8,000 hoplites and as many lightly armed warriors. The Spartans had an army of roughly the same size. Mardonius was killed at the very beginning of the battle, which disorganized his army. Most of the Persian army and its Greek allies were killed or captured. However, the fate of the Greco-Persian Wars was decided not on land but at sea. Soon after the Battle of Plataea, Thebes, the largest Greek city that had sided with the Persian king, was captured. In 478 BC, Athens created the Delian League, named after the island of Delos, the gathering place of the allied fleet and the storage of the allied treasury. Subsequently, the war took place outside Greece. In 468 BC, the Athenian commander Cimon defeated the Persians at the Eurymedon River on the southern coast of Asia Minor. However, the rivalry between Sparta and Athens led to war between them, which weakened the Greeks. In 454 BC, an elite Athenian fleet sent to aid the Egyptians revolting against Persian rule was completely destroyed in the Nile Delta. Soon, the detachment of Athenians who had withstood an 18-month siege on one of the islands in the Nile Delta was also destroyed. The Persians diverted water from one of the river branches and were able to attack the besieged on land. In 449 BC, the Athenians took revenge by winning a double, land and sea, battle near the Cypriot city of Salamis. In the same year, the Greco-Persian Wars ended with the Peace of Callias. It was signed in Susa. The Persian king was forced to abandon hegemony in the Aegean Sea basin and recognize the autonomy of the Greek polis of Asia Minor. The defeat in the Greco-Persian Wars marked the beginning of the decline of the Persian Empire of the Achaemenid dynasty. The period of its decline lasted for over 100 years, until the conquests of Alexander the Great. In Greece, hegemony passed to Athens, which, however, lost it half a century later during the Peloponnesian War. During the Greco-Persian Wars, it became clear that the most powerful combat formation on land was the phalanx, a closed formation of heavily armed infantrymen, hoplites, whose main weapon was a 2-meter spear, the sarissa. They also had a large round wooden shield, the hoplon, covered with leather or dense fabric. The hoplites were also armed with short swords and had metal helmets, cuirasses and greaves. The depth of the phalanx ranged from 8 to 16 rows, and one row could number up to 1,000 men, giving a front width of up to 500 meters. The phalanxes were formed from the most affluent citizens of the Greek polis. Less affluent citizens as well as non-citizen medics formed auxiliary units of slingers and archers without heavy armor, as well as the crews of naval vessels. Phalanxes were used by both sides, but they were more numerous among the Balkan Greeks, as the population of the polis of Balkan Greece that opposed Persia significantly outnumbered the population of the Greek cities of Asia Minor that were part of the Persian Empire. The phalanx was held together only by the discipline of the soldiers who composed it and their ability to maintain formation. A phalanx that broke formation was doomed to defeat against enemy cavalry and foot archers. The phalanx could only operate on flat terrain without hills and ravines. Such areas in Greece were small in size. A phalanx of several thousand men could still deploy on them, but there was not enough room for cavalry units operating in a dispersed formation to maneuver. The discipline of the phalanx was the discipline of the civic community of the Greek polis. The peoples of Persia did not know such a community. Mounted archers were recruited from nomadic tribes. They were accustomed to a free life and operated best in a dispersed formation on flat terrain. In mountainous Greece, the Persian cavalry had no room to deploy. Moreover, it was beyond the power of the archers to crush the phalanx bristling with spears and protected by strong shields. The Persian commanders failed to establish optimal interaction between the cavalry and the heavily armed infantry. The Persian foot archers became easy prey for enemy phalanxes. At sea, the more powerful Greek triremes ships with 3 rows of oars proved more effective than the Phoenician galleys. The Phoenicians, who were the inventors of the trireme, had fewer such ships than the cheaper galleys. Athens was the richest city in the eastern Mediterranean and was able to create the most powerful fleet. Having many more rowers, they were less dependent on the whims of the weather and developed, especially in calm conditions, a greater speed than enemy ships. This ensured the success of the Athenian and Spartan fleets.